introduce today's speaker, Professor James Dunn, based in Nagoya, teaching at Aichi University. James is an expert on critical thinking. His interests are not only in how you can apply critical thinking to the different skill sets, such as reading and writing, that teachers teach across the world, but also how critical thinking also impacts cultural awareness. James is also the coordinator of the Critical Thinking Special Interest Group for the Japan Association of Language Teachers here in Japan. With that said, I would like to hand over to James, who will be telling us now about how to integrate critical thinking into your reading and writing courses. James, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that very nice introduction. I wouldn't know if I'm an expert in critical thinking. Maybe I'm too critical of myself, but I do consider myself a critical thinking enthusiast, as it were, when it comes to language learning. I try to integrate it as much as I can into my curriculums and into my classes. And I'd like to share a little bit of what I've done in my past with you today, and hopefully you'll find it useful and maybe interesting. So the first thing I'd like to ask you is a question. What do you think a good definition for critical thinking would be? I think Melissa is going to be sharing a short survey with you. There's a couple of choices there. So a skill for debates, a way for evaluating an opinion, a way of forming an opinion, a reflective approach to thinking. Which one do you think is the best definition for critical thinking? All right, so wow, lots of people answering very quickly, very nice. Okay, so while you are voting, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of what I did at my previous school, Tokai University, the curriculum design that I made there, and the project booklet that we integrated into our reading and writing courses. So I was very lucky to be in a situation where we were changing curriculum from a strict reading and writing curriculum to a more academic style. So this is we did a first year and a second year course, and I was working on the second year course for this project booklet, and it was to be called Academic English Course. Now, at Tokai, this was a unified curriculum, meaning all the teachers were using the same syllabus, same book. So they're pretty much on the same page throughout the entire semester. We did have 3 different levels, a basic, intermediate, and advanced level for all of our reading and writing first year and second year courses. And we chose to still focus, of course, on reading and writing as the primary aspects of this course, but we wanted to integrate critical thinking into the curriculum as a core goal. Not only because I like critical thinking, but because Japan's Ministry of Education is asking schools to integrate more logical thinking and critical thinking into their curriculums. So we were actually trying to stay in line with the mixed goals in Japan. So we chose a textbook. It was actually, funny enough, a Cambridge University Press book called Unlock. One of the reasons why we liked that book was it integrated critical thinking into the units, and it was customizable for our needs. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Again, a unified curriculum, all the teachers were on the same page. We needed to add topic-specific critical thinking activities to both the textbook, the curriculum, and a final project, which is the project book I'll be talking about today. This is the title page or the cover page of our Academic English Critical Thinking project book that we made. I say we, I was the leader of the curriculum design in the curriculum committee at Tokai University at the time, but I was not alone. Something this intricate, I guess you could say, as you get to know this project book, is not something one person makes by themselves, but I had a team of really good people behind me. So I was very happy and very lucky to have good educators on my team. It focuses mainly on critical thinking, but it applies that critical thinking to the textbook and other news sources around the student. It was used by all students, again, unified curriculum. So I would say about 98% of the students at Tokai University across 3 different campuses were using these project booklets. 3 different levels were made, one for basic, one for intermediate, and one for advanced. Each one was a little bit different. Basic would have some translations in it. The advanced had more activities and more difficult vocabulary in it and did not have translations. This supports ideas of things like research, critical thinking. Are you getting information from a trusted source? It has activities that are both contemplative, reflective, and creative. We wanted students using their imagination when they're learning these new skills. In the curriculum, it was worth about 15% of their total grade in that class. There was a productive activity at the very end in part 5, as you'll see. So that was about worth 10% of the grade, and completing the rest of the project book, just the different parts, was 5%. Again, I got to give a shout out to my team. They did a great job helping to make this and helping to design the curriculum at Tokai University. So Melissa, if you can you share our answers from the, well, a reflective approach to thinking is number 1 with 63%. That's cool. Way of forming opinion, way of valuing opinion, skill for debates. Not many debate teachers, huh? That's cool, which is fine. In fact, I would say that depending on your situation, all the choices could be correct. There is no 100% accepted definition of critical thinking. And if you are going to try to integrate critical thinking into a curriculum or into a class or into an activity, I would encourage you to come up with a definition that encompasses what you're trying to achieve. So for our project booklet, we tried to encompass all of those choices that were in the survey, and we had a kind of a driving definition of the ability to think clearly and rationally about what to do or what to believe while being reflective, flexible, and independent. Now, this is very important for us to encompass all of these things, because thinking clearly, thinking rationally, that is very, very basic critical thinking things. Being reflective or metacognitive in your thinking, being flexible, and that you can change your opinion if you find new information, and being independent, as in you have a trusted source, but maybe we want them to feel that they can be a trusted source through research as well. So this was our guiding mantra, I guess it were, as we created the curriculum and created this project booklet. Okay. So starting at the beginning, this will be the first pages that the students see in the book. We want to give them a flow of the project booklet and give them a chance to think about what's going to be coming up ahead. You'll notice we have project part 1, part 2, part 3, 4, and 5, along with the class numbers. So if you remember, this is a unified curriculum at Tokai University. It doesn't have to be. If you wanted to do this either on paper or online, it's completely fine to do it in one class or across multiple classes. It's just for us, it was a multi-stage project book that they did over about a month. If you're thinking a month, 17 to 25, that's a lot of weeks. Well, at Tokai University, we actually had 2 classes a week. So students would come to a reading and writing class or an academic English class on Monday and Thursday, or they might come on a Tuesday and a Friday. So they'd have 2 classes each week. So classes 17 to 18 was actually 1 week. Throughout the whole project, we're looking a little bit over a month at the end of the semester. Why did we give them this paper? It's a lot of information. Well, in the basic book, it did have a Japanese translation, but in the advanced book, it did not. We wanted to let them know what was coming up so they could plan ahead. They would know what's going to be expected of them. They could flip through the project book and see what's going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks. And down at the bottom, the most important part, because this was worth 15% of their grade, remind them to keep the booklet, because if they did not turn in the booklet at the end of the semester, they could not get a grade for that. So moving on to part 1, changing the student construal. If you're familiar with cognitive linguistics, construal is basically how you view the world, and it can be applied to anything. If you want to, say, make a student change the way they think about the TOEIC test, get them from changing from a TOEIC taker to a TOEIC maker type of mentality, you're changing their construal, how they view the test in their world. So we wanted to change how they view English in their world by focusing less on grammatical structure and more on meaning that is being conveyed to them. So we're starting with their thinking and the information that's presented to them. You'll see that a lot in this project book. It's that the information being presented to them, should they trust it? Should they believe it? Should they act on it? Again, this is all back to that central definition of critical thinking. So we gave them sentences that they could they were grammatically fine, but they could feel something was wrong. Something didn't quite make sense with these sentences. And it's not something that students were ever really asked to elucidate. Why did something feel strange? If they read it, it made sense, but at the same time, logically, it did not make sense. We did this in order to build a sense of deep thinking from the very, very first pages of the project. We want them thinking about what they know, thinking about what they don't know, or metacognitively, if you will, getting them to look into the message of the language presented to them, which is very, very important later in the project book, and start developing a kind of intellectual independence and curiosity. Independence as in, I know this makes sense, but there's something wrong with it. Curiosity, what's wrong with it? How can I explain it? And this is what it looks like. So we had a couple of sentences. We have an example: hospitals are full of sick people. If we go there, we will get sick. Grammatically, it's fine, but it doesn't quite make sense, does it? People don't really get sick at a hospital, hopefully. They are sick before they have to go to the hospital. So we'd ask the student to rewrite the sentence to make it a little bit logically sensible, I guess you could say. People who are sick go to a hospital to get better. Number one, bonus points if you can guess the movie this quote came from. The majority of the time, it works every time. So if you know the movie that comes from, it was a comedy movie called Anchorman. And the original quote was 60% of the time, it works every time. And that doesn't make any sense, because if it works every time, it should be 100% of the time. So majority, every time, they had to find that disconnect between the meaning and what the meaning is being conveyed to them, and then rewrite it. 100% of the time, it's working every time, or something like that. Again, not worried about grammar, not worried about too much about sentence structure, just are they thinking more deeply about this? On the right side of the page, you can see that they were asked to make their own original sentences. In the basic level, they were only asked, I think, to do 1 or 2, but in the advanced, they were asked to do 3. They would switch with a partner and then have to read the sentences, try to make sense of it, and then rewrite it to make it a better sentence. Now, down below, homework. It says, read through Unit C1. If you're familiar with the Unlocked book, you'll know that there is not a C1 book. I'll be explaining this a little bit more in detail later on, but C1 for us was a common Unit 1 for our textbook. We were very lucky to work with Cambridge University Press, and they were able to change some of the unit names for us. We had common units and then specific units, which were either for science or humanities. But I'll talk about it in a minute, but our students were asked to go back to the unit that they covered at the beginning of the semester. So C1 was their first unit. Look for sentences that they thought might not make sense, write down 2 below. And there were some in the texts, some of the instructions or whatnot. It's not, there are no perfect textbooks. I would be very honest with that, and explain why they felt it was a bit strange. We did this for a couple of reasons. We wanted students to review the texts that they had covered in the past, reuse the information, and again, start thinking more deeply about what they have read in previous in the course. Moving on to part 2, logical fallacies. Logical fallacies is, well, very, very critical thinking type of skill. It's a tool that students can use to evaluate if something makes sense or not. We chose some of the most ubiquitous logical fallacies that students can see all over the place. Why do we want to introduce logical fallacies? Well, it introduces a kind of I guess you could say, I hate to say this, but real critical thinking, in that you are evaluating logical statements, or you're evaluating how you support your opinions. And that's very much the crux of what critical thinking is. So we chose 4 to give them as tools to evaluate information in their daily lives. And their students and us as teachers are just bombarded all the time by advertisements or flyers or posters, billboards, magazine, online internet article, or internet articles, internet advertisements, you name it. Should we buy something? Should we believe the information? Should we do more research on the subject? We want students thinking that way. And also giving them a new tool to use for logic starts to develop that curiosity that was very important for us in our definition of critical thinking. So this is what we gave them for our logical fallacies. We didn't use the Latin because we're not evil people. Using Latin in an English class might be a little bit difficult, but we chose the expert fallacy, which is appeal to authority. So basically a doctor or a famous person or an athlete tells you this is the product you should buy. We focused mainly on advertisements because we knew the students would be able to see these throughout their daily lives. The second was the emotional fallacy, making them feel bad or to feel good for some kind of action to manipulate their behavior. The third, everyone is doing it, ad populum, the appeal to everyone else is doing it around you, right? If everyone's doing it, it must be good, therefore you should agree with it. Well, not always true. And finally, the two-choice fallacy. Basically, you give a good choice and you give a terrible choice. And of course, the one you want them to choose is that good choice, but that's not really a choice. There aren't always just two choices. So we want students to think about, is an advertisement or is, say, an article only giving one side and a really bad side in order to manipulate the way you think? Finally, moving on, we have identifying logical fallacies. So after explaining, again, the basic level students would have a Japanese translation for this. The intermediate and advanced did not. We have 10 sentences on the right over here. For example, number 1, all my friends are doing it. They'd have to read that, think about it, and identify which logical fallacy. Do you know? Easy, I know. Everyone is doing it fallacy because all my friends are doing it. Moving on to number 4, look, you're either part of the population solution or problem. Really, if there are only really two choices, that is the two-choice fallacy. So 8, saving the environment kills jobs. Well, that could be either emotional fallacy or two-choice fallacy. Number 10, everyone knows that this company is more difficult. Well, everyone knows, really? They all feel the same way? It's kind of a stereotype. Everyone is doing it. Then at the bottom, students would write 2 of their own and switch with a partner and try to identify their original sentences as which logical fallacy they were. Now, I told you we tried to be very creative in this project book. So the second part of this, part 2, was making their own flyers and advertisements. So we asked students, depending on the timing of the class, if they had more time, they could do more. If they had less time, they do maybe 1 or 2. Pick a few logical fallacies, make up some kind of advertisement, and we were floored by how creative our students were. They were drawing extra pictures inside of it, not just adding words. They were being very creative with the topics they chose. It was really quite cool to see. Some teachers decided to keep this activity in the book. Other teachers would have them up on the board and have students come draw them up on the board so they could share them with the class and discuss them. So it really depended on the teacher how they approached this. But this one was a lot of fun to get students to think more deeply about the logical fallacies and how they're presented to them in daily life. So moving from daily life, though, we wanted to focus on the textbook. So the homework was, at home, go through Common Unit 1 and Common Unit 2. Look for the sentences that you think might contain one of the 4 logical fallacies. And again, the people who write textbooks are human. I've helped write textbooks, but it's hard to avoid logical fallacies all the time, especially when there's deadlines and things like that. So sometimes they sneak in there. Well, we asked our students to go through those 2 units. Each unit had 2 readings. So they were reviewing all the units that they had covered prior to this project book, looking more deeply for logical fallacies and things that didn't make sense. Pick 2 from the text, what fallacy, and why did they think so? Moving on, part 3. This is where we're getting a bit more metacognitive about how students think about the news they are presented, how they feel about the media sources that they get information from, and how they can actually do some checking if information online that they, either online or in an advertisement, is correct or real or trying to mislead them. Students were asked to evaluate their consumption of information, meaning we wanted them to think about and reflect about how they get information in their lives. Are they getting it from Instagram? Are they getting it from Twitter? Are they getting it from Facebook? Are they getting it from newspapers? Maybe not as popular as they used to be. We want them to, or want to introduce them rather, to ways of checking information. How can you check information if it is presented to you and it makes you feel like, wait, there's something wrong with this, or hey, there's a logical fallacy here. And we ask them to do a little bit of critical thinking about their trusted sources. If you always get your information from here, here's some criteria that would help you evaluate, is this a good source or a bad source of information? Again, back to our definition of critical thinking, that is that flexibility of opinion part. Asking questions about information to better judge it, reading fake news. We did actually put fake news in our project booklet and see if they could tell it was real or not. And again, starting to turn these skills even more toward the textbook. So this is what it looks like. Part 3, evaluating news sources. A few metacognitive type questions at the beginning. Do they know what a viral post is on a social media site? How many of these types of posts, articles, videos, photographs do you click on each week? We're not asking for specific data per se, just kind of to think about how many would be fine. How many of these viral posts on average do you think you share on social media? How often do you check to make sure what you're sharing or commenting is real? And why do you check or not check? And how much do you care, from a little to a lot, if a story is actually real or not? Most students were on the right side, the 7, 9, 10 area. So they did actually care if what they were sharing is real or not. And then what sources of news do you usually trust? In Japan, there's a couple of different news sites. Most of them are pretty similar, but we wanted students to think about their news or how they get the news. Do they trust it and why? Then down below, we give them a few ways to check if a news story is real or not. Some of them are better than others. For example, check other news sites. Well, critical thinking, you want to avoid cognitive bias of oh gosh, I can't think of the name right now. Confirmation bias, confirmation bias by only using one source of information. So we're encouraging students checking other news sites as a good kind of safe way to get more information to see if something is good or bad. Researching Wikipedia, we would give them as a bad or kind of a risky way of checking if news is real or not, because Wikipedia can be edited by almost anybody. Looking for citations, finding out more about the source, do a reverse image search, looking at the author, and any other ideas that they might have, they could share with each other, because they'd be switching with a partner and sharing their ideas and discussing the differences. On the right side, you can see there are some pictures with some questions. Now, these questions were to give students a way to kind of start looking deeper into the message of advertisements or news stories. You can say, who made this? How was it made? Why was this made? What is missing? So is there information that's not there that should be? And where do I go from here? And so should I do more research? Should I check Wikipedia? Should I go to another news site? And then further practice down below. This is, again, remember, it's a difficult text down there, but it is for the advanced level classes. Truth has never been an essential ingredient of viral content on the internet. But in the stepped up competition for readers, digital news sites are increasingly blurring the lines between fact and fiction and saying that it's all a part of doing business in the rough and tumble world of online journalism. Now, this is written by us. It does use some of the vocabulary from the textbook to reinforce that vocabulary, but we wanted to get them being a bit more reflective and see, does it matter to them if they can tell real news from fake news? Usually they said yes. Do they think fake stories can have real world negative impact? Many of them said yes. And when you have a friend or you have fallen for fake news, how did you find out? How did you feel after finding out? This was a bit more difficult because university students may or may not have a lot of experience through finding out news is fake or not. They might just consume it and move on. But we wanted to give them the tools to start asking questions about information. Now, the fun part, we had 4 different fake news. 3 of them were fake. 3 of them we made up. 1 of them is actually real. What do you think? Let's go through them real quick. Australia to become first vegan nation. All right. Do you think that's a real story or do you think that's a fake story? Students would have to rate it from 1, they think is very fake, to 10 being really 100% real, they think. Second one, all new drivers will need to complete basic mechanics course in New York. And a synopsis of a article down below. Third one, no more cheese from Elizabeth. It's talking about how you can't take photos. Cheese, you can't take photos of Queen Elizabeth. And the last one, male nipples reduce baby stress. So a scientific study that said babies were able to be soothed, not just by female nipples, but also male nipples. One of them is fake. Oh, sorry, one of them is real. 3 of them are fake, sorry. Which one do you think is real? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. So the actual real article is the male nipples reduce baby stress, which is an actual scientific study done and then reported on by The Guardian in the UK. No more cheese and no more photos of Elizabeth and drivers being basic mechanics, and of course, Australia, which is famous for beef, becoming a vegan nation, were all fake. Students, they were all chosen to be kind of fake. So we wanted them questioning everything, because that's what it's all been building up to, right? Is being able to question things, being able to do some research. And a lot of the students who were able to find the last article being real, they actually did some research online, found the original article and said, oh yeah, this is real, which is what we wanted them doing anyway. On the right side, again, going back into the readings, but this one has S and H, which I'll explain here in a second. But the students, depending on their major, would do either the S unit or the H unit. And they'd have to look at one of the readings. They'd look at the title. Does the title use a logical fallacy? Does the title give an opinion? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Can you find logical fallacies in the article? Yes or no? If you could, write an example and explain it. Does the article cite sources? Yes or no? If no, is that good or bad? If yes, is the source good or bad? And why do you think so? Now, the last part down there on the right is very important for us, because this is our first turn into the bigger productive part of this project. They're writing a short opinion about the following prompt. Do you agree with what the reading tells you? Why or why not? So this is very much connected to the final productive activity in this project book, where they're actually writing a reaction paper to a text in the textbook, one of the readings. So this is a easy introduction into that type of reaction paper writing. Part 4, diving deeper. It's all about research. We wanted students to develop research skills, looking deeper into a topic and expanding their knowledge on the topic. So before I get into part 4 in the research, I really want to give a shout out to Cambridge University Press. We could not have done this project booklet without them. Our new curriculum would not have been the same without their support. We were able to customize our textbooks a little bit because Tokai is a very large school. We were doing it across 3 campuses, and they were able to help us kind of rename some of our units, take some units out, and then add some activities in the back of the book that supported the topics in the book. So we had 3 units, or 3 levels rather, going from Sefer level pre-A1 to A1 for the basic, A1 to A2 for intermediate, and then A2 up to B1. As they went throughout the textbook, it got more difficult toward the S and H units. So they'd end up on the Sefer level that we wanted them at. So we renamed the last 2 levels, the highest levels of the textbook, as S for a science type unit, or H as a humanities type unit. This is really important for us because the rest of the project book focuses on either the S or H unit. Science type students, say for example, mathematics, physics, biology type students, would usually do the science type unit. And humanities, say history or economics, might use the H unit. Now, we did not stipulate to the teachers who taught these project books, if a mathematics or a physics group of students wanted to do the H unit, that's okay. It was all about developing skills. It wasn't about, we wanted to deepen their science knowledge. But usually students who were more science oriented did end up choosing S units. Students who are more humanities oriented did usually end up choosing the H units. Right? So this is what it looks like real quick as an overview. It's all about research, all about getting more information, all about diving deeper into what the textbook is actually trying to tell them. Why do we do this? Well, we want them to gain further knowledge of the topics. We want to dive deeper, as the title suggests. We want to show them how important research is and check the information that is in the textbook to see if it's either, well, correct, the same as what they find online, or different, and why. We want them to become more knowledgeable about the topics in their textbook. So this is an example of the H. Again, this is advanced, so there's a lot more blanks and a lot less scaffolding. And the basic and intermediate, was a bit more scaffolding. So the topic for H in the advanced book was population age trending downward. So the Japan's population trends. So what we wanted to do is have students go online using various sources and find the population of Japan 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 4 years ago, and 1 year ago, and then choose 2 other countries and do the exact same thing. Say United States and Finland, maybe. I thought one of the attendees was from Finland, moi, mitikure. And it was very interesting for the students because the information that they found sometimes did match the textbook, but depending on the website that they used, sometimes it didn't. One of the intermediate topics was sea levels rising. And some of the students found the same information that was presented in the textbook. Some other students found different information, either better or worse for the future of the world. So we were able to get them to be more curious and more kind of involved in the topic because they're finding information that's a little bit different or the same. And they could say, why? Why is it like this? Now, part 2 of this, we asked them to research different effects and explain the effects of an aging population. And then what kind of social impacts do they think it might have on Japan? So we wanted them to go beyond the textbook. We wanted them to gain more mastery of the topic. And by doing research, they're going to get exposure to other vocabulary, connected vocabulary to this. So we wanted to increase their exposure and knowledge of vocabulary about these topics as well, while doing research allows them to think more deeply. One interesting thing is that students were allowed to use their cell phones in class to research the data if the teacher was doing it in the class. If due to, say, time constraints, they didn't have the same time, they could do it at home using their PC or Mac. This is an example of the S unit. For the advanced classes, they were talking about alternative energy sources. So they had some that were given to them in the textbook, but they wanted to find 2 or 3 more pros and cons in addition to what was given to them in the textbook. We encouraged them to write down the websites where they found the information from because sources are very important. And then second question changes a bit to rubbish and pollution. How does Japan deal with its rubbish? You can easily understand that Unlock is a British English type of textbook because we used rubbish and not trash. Why in Japan do we have to separate it into burnable and unburnable? Again, thinking a bit more deeply about the topic, things that were not covered in the textbook. And part 3, this is connected to one of those supplemental activities that we put in the back of the book. We introduced 3 more alternative sources, fusion, offshore wind, and solar fuel. Students had to do a bit more research into those and think about the positive impacts and negative impacts of those sources of energy. Again, going beyond the textbook, gaining mastery of the topic, and increasing vocabulary while thinking more deeply. Now, it all kind of comes to this. Part 5, a productive activity to put everything together, focused on the textbook. Now, we're not saying any textbook in the world is perfect because they all have good things and bad things. But we wanted them thinking deeply and critically about a source of information that they trust. And the textbook in a school, as a student, that is kind of your trusted source of information. So asking questions about a trusted source of information could be very important. This last section of the project booklet, asked them to reread a text. They could pick one from either the H or the S unit, whichever one they did in class. They had to ask questions of that text to look for logical inconsistencies or differing data. Do more research, or in the lower levels, use the research that they had in their project book to answer their questions, and then write a well-developed and formatted reaction paper on the in-unit text. After they had written their reaction paper, they switch, and each student would have a review, a peer review, if you will, of their reaction papers. So it wouldn't be fair to just say, hey, write a reaction paper. So we scaffolded it pretty well. Again, kudos to Cambridge University Press. This is actually a part of their textbook that we were allowed to use inside of our project booklet, as long as we did not charge for it. It was freely given to all the students. But they would read, so this is an example from, I think, C1. It was talking about obesity. And then as they read the text, they would ask questions. For example, it may be hard to read, but the first paragraph says, obesity is becoming a major problem in many parts of the world. In Britain alone, there was a 30% increase in the number of people, da, 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 da. The question was, they might ask themselves, well, what about Japan? The information in England is great, but what about, they talked about many parts of the world, but if they only talk about England, why are they introducing the world to it? And as they keep reading, they'll keep asking questions and making notes in either a piece of paper or in the margins of their textbook. It's like, for example, is this correct? Or is Japanese food the same as this? Maybe this works, but education is better. Things that they could use either to support their research that they did before. Again, not on this topic, on the S or H topic. This is the C1 reading, and give a critique. So down at the bottom, we gave an example critique of some information is correct, but biased about British people. Doesn't provide information about what other countries do. Should focus more on schools teaching how to make healthy food choices. So that's how they would base their reaction paper on. Some of the sources down below as an example. If something piqued their interest, if something made them ask a question, we asked them to write it down. If they didn't already have research data to answer that question, we asked them to research it and find it. And then we gave them some place to do sources and references. The next page is actually an example of the obesity reaction paper. It goes through all the different parts from some information correct, biased, doesn't provide what other countries do, focus more on schools. But again, we didn't want to throw them in the deep end and just say, write a reaction paper. We want to give them a good example and steps they could use to write this, because it was a good 10% of their grade. So we have introduction and thesis, the different basic parts of a good essay. We have example details that they should be including to support their opinions. We gave them a couple of ways to scaffold, to give their opinion and reactions. And we gave examples of references down below. We also gave 3 questions down at the bottom to help them write their reaction paper and see if this is a good reaction paper. For example, number 1, what do you think the author didn't talk about? So missing information, those questions that they asked. 2, what is your opinion? Well, that's the crux of any reaction paper. And then what is your evidence? What kind of sources, what kind of information are you using? Make sure to put those in the references. We also give them concrete steps they could follow. Just a little bit extra information. The basic level was asked to do a 1-paragraph paper. A intermediate level was asked to do from 1 to 3. 3 would be the best, 1 would be okay. The advanced level, minimum 3 paragraphs, best would be 5 paragraphs. So if you remember, the example was actually 5 paragraphs. So we gave them some steps. For example, read one of the articles from S or H, free write, brainstorm ideas about the article, look at your questions, look for fallacies, decide on your critique, use the information that you get in the research in part 4, or do more if you need. Find 1 or 2 quotes, because we wanted students to do quotes at the same time. And decide your thesis, write 1 sentence that clearly states your opinion and critique, organize your paper into 3 paragraphs, because in other, for the advanced class, we said 3, start with 3, then expand to 5. Think about where you want to put your quotations, then write your reaction paper, minimum 150 words. So we also had a checklist down at the bottom. So once they chose the text, check for logical fallacies, use the questions they wrote in the article, use the information they did from the research, organize and write their paper, basically, and as much support as we could give them because we want them to do well and think well about this paper that they were writing. Finally, we gave them space to write a paper. Again, if you remember way back when we started this presentation, we asked students to keep their textbook or their project book, because if they didn't turn this page in, well, they're missing a lot, 10% of their grade. The other 5%, of course, was just doing the sections prior to this productive activity. So we gave them space for a title, and we gave them lots of space for writing. And if they needed extra pages, they could actually do that too. And of course, down at the bottom, we gave them space for references. We were quite impressed with what the students were able to produce, which I'll talk about in a minute, a little bit more about that. After that, we asked the students to evaluate each other's papers. So they read each other's papers, they answered a few questions. They got more practice in reading on the topic. Again, deeper understanding, they're seeing somebody else's view. Seeing vocabulary other students chose to include in their papers. Decided if they agree or disagree and why. And then suggest additions to the classmate's paper. So again, this is all using that critical thinking, those critical thinking skills that we introduced throughout the project booklet, but not only applied to the textbook, applied to their real life, but applied to their peers as well. At the end, this is a paper version of a questionnaire that we had students finish at the end. A paper version, as the leader of the curriculum design committee, I didn't want to collate all that data. So it actually was moved online to a Google Forms where students could digitally answer those questions, and it was collated through the forms for us. But we wanted to see, after the project booklet, did they think that their thinking skills had improved? Could they evaluate where statements were logical or coherent? Could they recognize logical fallacies? Could they evaluate and critique new information better than before? Could they produce evidence-based opinions in their writing? And then understanding the topic, which was pretty good, but they had a lot of extra topic and a lot of extra readings of what they've done in the textbook. So a lot of good answers down here. I could understand the contents of the reading material better. Their ability to do and complete the project was important to us, because if the students felt that the project was too difficult, we'd be able to adjust it in the future. And if they could understand the requirements of the writing assignment. So were they able to do what we were asking them to do? Also, a few other skills down at the bottom. Could they paraphrase information? Could they distinguish major points from minor ones in the text? And could they choose stronger and more effective evidence to support their opinions, which is critical thinking for us. Overall, it was a success, I would say. I don't really have a lot of time to go into the results of the questionnaires. If you're interested in that, I will share a paper with you. But my reflection on doing this new curriculum at Tokai University is any major change to a curriculum is going to take a lot of patience. It's going to take thick skin as a leader of a curriculum committee, and nerves of steel to kind of, do what you think is right. At Tokai University, again, it was a very large program. So we had, across 3 campuses, about 300 part-time teachers that were using this, and about 45, 50 full-time tenured, either contract full-time or tenured full-time teachers using this. With that many people using this, we had a lot of opinions flying at us, but we were very open and very kind of luckily able to share our design decisions. And as things were going through, we shared it through, say, like town hall meetings or professional development meetings to introduce what the changes would be and to get feedback as we were making those changes. So in the end, while at the beginning of the introduction of this curriculum and the project booklet, teachers were like, I don't know, maybe they can't do it. But at the end, no, it worked okay. The students enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing what the students could come up when they were being creative. And it hopefully it's a skill they can use for the rest of their lives. Critical thinking is not only something you use in school. It's something that you can use in work, in life, in making friends, looking through the newspaper. Everywhere in our life, critical thinking can touch that. So that's pretty cool. If we can make our students a bit more of a critical thinkers, to me, as again, a critical thinking enthusiast, I think that's pretty cool. So if you're not a curriculum lead, I mean, my experience through a curriculum leader and the curriculum design committee, that's no problem. You don't need to do a booklet as a part of a curriculum. You could make this for your class. It could be for a reading class. It could be for a speaking class. You could do it paper-based if you're face-to-face. You could do it online if you're not face-to-face. If you're familiar with using technology like Adobe Acrobat, you can make that project booklet 100% digital, where students can write into blanks on a PDF. So you don't have to have a, say, printer budget at your school in order to do this. You actually do this digitally online, no problem at all. You can learn, if you're interested, you can learn more about the details and how it was received by both the teachers and the students. I just published a paper which is coming out next month and called Critical Thinking in University through a curriculum-wide reading and writing project. It's in development of innovative pedagogical practices for a modern learning experience. Again, I've been told it'll be coming out next month in November. So if you're interested, I'll share my email in the chat later on. I'm very happy to answer questions later in the question and answer part today, but also after the presentation, if you're curious about something, or if you have questions about critical thinking and language learning, I'm very happy to help. It's what I do. It's what I love to do. So if you're interested in critical thinking and language learning, please reach out. I'm really happy to help. Seriously, no joke. And I think that about does it for me. I hope I didn't go over or under time too much, but I think we do have some time for questions and answers. Ivan?
We do indeed. Thank you very, very much, James, for the presentation. If you could show your appreciation, if you could just write clap into the chat box, that would be great. It's difficult to hear your applause, but it's very, very good to see it as well. So if you put thanks or clap, that would be great. Thank you so much.
I had chat hidden the whole time, so I didn't see it. So thank you all very much for coming today. It was really, really fun to see so many people from all over the world. Really, really nice to have just the entire world watching today. So that was really cool. Thank you so much.
Indeed. Thank you very, very much. And thank you also for those of you that have been able to put some questions into the Q&A box. And we have about 10 minutes for questions and answers, and then I'll be talking a little bit about... Sorry. It's okay. We'll have a little bit of time also to explain some of the resources where you can find the videos as well, and videos to the session today and the rest of the Academic English Conference. But first of all, some simple questions for you. One was, what citation was used? That came up a few times. Was it APA citation that you used?
Yes, we were mostly using APA citation. It's just what we're used to, I guess you could say, teaching English in Japan. When we publish as researchers in Japan, we almost exclusively use APA 6. So we were teaching students how to use APA 6. One of the extra supplemental prints that was in the back of the textbook was an APA 6 reference style print with Japanese and English explanation for how to cite, both in text and outside of text, how to cite sources of information.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that APA is very commonly used here in Japan. I mean, in your particular countries, you may find other citation systems are more common. Another question that I saw many, many times was about the booklet. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that booklet was specifically for Tokai University. It's not something that's available for anybody else. And the purpose of you sharing... Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, it's 100% original. Yes. Myself, I mean, I came up with the idea at Tokai to have a project, and I had a great team with me. We came up with different activities and different things we could add to this project book, but it's 100% originally made. I can't share the project book, of course, because it was made on Tokai time. But if you're interested in, say, critical thinking printouts or something like that, I'm happy to share. Just reach out. I'll put my email into the chat. Just did. You can contact me. I'll be happy to share what I have. Honestly, I think critical thinking is really important. And if I can even a little bit help you to integrate critical thinking into your classrooms, I'm very happy to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. So now you know if you are interested in it, you know to contact James directly. There were a couple of other questions. There were a couple of other questions also in the Q&A box as well. Some slightly different and some slightly linked as well. One of them was, what do you think about the link between comprehension and critical thinking?
Link between comprehension and critical thinking is very important. The deeper you think about something, the more than likely, the better you're going to comprehend something. If you are, I hate to say this, but a lot of students, when it comes to learning English, are very cursory when it comes to reading information. So if you are requiring them to think more deeply about something, they're going to have better comprehension and better understanding of it, I believe. And this kind of is supported through some previous research I've done through testing and critical thinking styled strategies for the TOEIC. If you get students, I actually had my students hooked up to EEG machines. So we were measuring brain waves of students as they were taking tests and using strategies. And I was looking for originally reduction in stress, but that wasn't the case, actually. It was focus and relaxation that changed when you had critical thinking and deeper thinking involved in test taking. So without deeper thinking, they were very relaxed more often than not. If they were reading the questions, their focus went up a little bit, but when they're reading the text, they become very relaxed. Using critical thinking, looking for logic, looking for connections when it comes to, say, a testing strategy, you're able to have more focus more of the time and see things a bit more clearly when it comes to taking a test. I believe that does go through into this type of project as well. If you're asking students to think more deeply, to do extra research, to combine new vocabulary into those skills, you're going to get better comprehension.
Indeed, indeed. One of the other questions that are somewhat related to that as well is, I guess, how does culture impact critical thinking?
I saw that question. Yes. There's two modes of thought on this. It's either Kubota, whereas she posits that culture does not really influence critical thinking, and Atkinson, who says, well, culture does influence the ability to do critical thinking. I'm much more on the Kubota side. I'm much more that critical thinking is a human ability. And it starts when we're children from executive function in the brain. If we touch something hot, our brain says, ooh, don't do that again. And the next time I see something hot, you're using a very basic form of critical thinking. If I touch this, I'm going to get hurt, right? So the presence of critical thinking in, say, casual conversation may be influenced by what is acceptable or not acceptable in culture, but the ability, which I think that's what Kubota had a lot of kind of issues with what Atkinson said, the ability to use critical thinking is ubiquitous among everybody in the world. No matter what country, what culture, what age, you can use critical thinking. There's no culture in the world that says don't think. Right? This doesn't exist. So I would say, yes, culture can influence the expression of critical thinking in communication, but it cannot say that a culture cannot do critical thinking. Everyone can do it.
Well, I mean, I'm a strong believer in that we're all fundamentally the same deep down. Yeah. So you would think that if one person can think critically, we should all be able to do it.
I hope so. Barring note, brain damage.
Well, of course. On that note, then, I think I would like to bring the session to a close.